Have you ever watched your entire life collapse in real time? Not just struggle, but completely unravel. Bank accounts locked, calls unanswered, people you trusted suddenly gone. And there you are, standing in a courtroom with nothing left but your name and the clothes on your back. That's exactly where Joy stood. Victor, her husband, was certain he had already finished her. In his mind, this wasn't even a fight. It was a formality. He believed that cutting her off financially would erase her quietly, like she had never mattered. In front of the judge, he didn't hesitate to humiliate her, calling her too naive, too incapable to even hire a lawyer. According to him, she had no credibility, no standing, no chance. Just a desperate woman clinging to nothing. But Victor overlooked one detail, one dangerous, irreversible mistake. He never asked Joy about her mother. And when those courtroom doors finally burst open, the shift in the room was instant. Victor's expression didn't just change, it cracked. What replaced his arrogance wasn't surprise. It was fear, real, undeniable fear. Because what happened next wasn't just a courtroom argument. It was a complete and merciless takedown. The kind people would whisper about long after the case was closed. A story of betrayal, arrogance, and a man who believed money made him untouchable until he collided with something far more dangerous, a mother who had nothing left to lose. Now listen carefully, because this story doesn't unfold the way you expect. Inside Courtroom 12 of the Port Harcourt High Court, the air felt heavy, suffocating. The ceiling fans turned lazily, pushing around thick humidity mixed with the dull scent of aged wood and polish. It was the kind of room where endings lived, where marriages were reduced to paperwork and signatures. But to Victor Okafor, it smelled like victory. He sat comfortably at the plaintiff's table, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored suit. Imported, expensive, the kind of fabric that silently announced power. His gold Rolex caught the light as he checked the time, his impatience barely hidden. "She's late," Victor muttered under his breath, leaning toward the man beside him. Or maybe she's finally realized this is pointless. That man was Barrister Aimcha Nosu, a name that carried weight across River State. In legal circles, he wasn't just respected, he was feared. People didn't hire Aimcha to negotiate. They hired him to destroy. His reputation was simple. Once he stepped in, the other side didn't recover. Aimcha adjusted his tie with calm precision, scanning through the case files like someone reviewing a finished job. "Whether she shows up or not doesn't change anything," he said smoothly. "We froze the joint accounts on Monday. She has no money." He paused, letting that sink in. No money means no lawyer. And no lawyer against me? A faint smile appeared. That's not a case. That's surrender. Victor leaned back, satisfied, and glanced across the room. Joy sat alone, completely alone. She looked smaller than he remembered, almost fragile. Her gray dress was plain, inexpensive, something easily overlooked in a crowded market. Her hands were clenched tightly on the table, her knuckles pale from the pressure. No files, no notes. No legal team, not even a glass of water, just silence, and her steady gaze fixed on the judge's empty seat. Victor smirked, loud enough for others to hear. "Look at her," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "It's pathetic, like watching an animal waiting to be slaughtered. She knows what's coming, she just can't stop it." "Focus," Aimcha murmured, though even he seemed faintly amused. "Justice Okoro doesn't tolerate noise." Victor exhaled confidently. "Relax. By 2 p. I'll be free, and she'll be figuring out how to get on a bus back to wherever she came from." The courtroom doors creaked open. Officer Chuku stepped in, his presence heavy with years of routine. His voice rang out with practiced authority. "All rise." The Honorable Justice Benjamin Okoro presiding. Everyone stood. The sound of movement echoed sharply in the high-ceilinged room. Justice Okoro entered with quiet control, his robe trailing behind him. Thin, sharp-eyed, and known for absolute discipline, he wasted no time settling into his seat. "Be seated." The room obeyed instantly. He opened the case file. Case number HCPH 2022 to 1847. Okafor versus Okafor. Preliminary hearing for dissolution of marriage and division of assets. His gaze moved to Victor's side. Barrister Nosu. My lord, Aimcha replied smoothly. We are ready. Then the judge turned toward Joy. His expression tightened slightly. Mrs. Okafor, I see you have no counsel present. Are you expecting representation? Joy rose slowly. There was a slight tremor in her legs, but she didn't sit back down. Yes, my lord, she said quietly. She will be here shortly. Victor let out a sharp, mocking laugh. He didn't even try to hide it. The sound sliced through the silence. Justice Okoro's head snapped toward him. Is something amusing, Mr. Okafor? Aimcha immediately stood, placing a steadying hand on Victor's shoulder. Apologies, my lord. My client is under considerable emotional strain. Control your client, the judge said coldly. This is a courtroom, not a marketplace. He turned back to Joy. This hearing was scheduled for 10 o'clock. Is now past that. If your counsel does not arrive shortly, we will proceed without representation. She is coming, Joy said again, this time with a hint of firmness. There was traffic on ABA Road. Victor leaned forward, unable to resist. Traffic, he muttered loudly. Or maybe your lawyer realized you can't pay her. I froze the accounts this morning, just in case you forgot. The gavel slammed. The crack echoed like a gunshot. One more interruption, Justice Okoro warned, his voice sharp, and you will spend the remainder of this hearing in a holding cell. Do you understand? Yes, my lord, Victor said quickly, masking his arrogance behind forced politeness. Then almost immediately he continued, more controlled, but no less cruel. I only want what's fair, he said. My wife doesn't understand how the world works. She has no income, no skills. I offer her a generous settlement. 2 million naira and a 2015 Toyota Camry. She refused. He turned, locking eyes with Joy. This hearing was scheduled for 10 o'clock. It is now past that. If your counsel does not arrive shortly, we will proceed without representation. She is coming, Joy said again, this time with a hint of firmness. There was traffic on ABA Road. Victor leaned forward, unable to resist. Traffic, he muttered loudly. Or maybe your lawyer realized you can't pay her. I froze the accounts this morning, just in case you forgot. The gavel slammed. The crack echoed like a gunshot. One more interruption, Justice Okoro warned, his voice sharp, and you will spend the remainder of this hearing in a holding cell. Do you understand? Yes, my lord, Victor said quickly, masking his arrogance behind forced politeness. Then, almost immediately, he continued, more controlled but no less cruel. I only want what's fair, he said. My wife doesn't understand how the world works. She has no income, no skills. I offered her a generous settlement, 2 million naira and a 2015 Toyota Camry. She refused. He turned, locking eyes with Joy. I tried to help you, he said coldly. But you chose this. Now look at you, sitting there alone. No lawyer, no support, because nobody works for free. Barrister Nosu, Justice Okoro snapped. Control your client. Aimcha rose again, calm as ever. My lord, he said smoothly, while my client's delivery may be unfortunate, the substance of his statement is entirely valid. And for a brief moment, just a brief moment, it seemed like Victor was right. Like Joy truly had no one coming. But what no one in that room realized was that the delay wasn't caused by traffic. It was timing. And something far bigger had just arrived that we are wasting the court's time. Emeka's voice cut cleanly through the room, controlled but impatient. Mrs. Okafor has clearly failed to secure representation. Under the rules of this court and established precedent, we respectfully request that proceedings move forward immediately based on the evidence already submitted. She has had more than enough time to prepare. Justice Okoro shifted his gaze toward Joy. There was a trace of exhaustion in his expression, like a man who had watched this exact situation play out too many times before. Mrs. Okafor, he said slowly, choosing each word with care. Barrister Nosu is technically correct. This court cannot wait indefinitely. If your counsel is not present, I must assume you are representing yourself. And given the complexity of the financial matters involved, he paused, studying her. That would be extremely unwise. Do you understand? I am not representing myself, my lord, Joy replied. Her voice was still quiet, but there was something different now. Not fear. Not exactly. Something steadier. Her eyes remained locked on the heavy courtroom doors behind everyone else. Please, she added, just 2 more minutes. Victor leaned forward, unable to hide his contempt. She's lying, he hissed. She has no one. Her father was a mechanic, dead for years. Her mother abandoned her. She has no family, no connections. Who exactly is she waiting for? A miracle? His laughter followed, sharp, cruel, echoing across the courtroom. And in that moment, Victor felt invincible. Because this hadn't happened by accident. He had engineered every detail. Frozen her accounts. Isolated her from friends. Poisoned every relationship she had left. He didn't just want to win. He wanted her broken. Completely. Permanently. My lord, Aim-Cha pressed, sensing the window closing. We move to strike her request for delay. Let us conclude this matter. Justice Okoro exhaled slowly. His fingers tightened around the gavel as he prepared to bring everything down to a final, irreversible moment. Mrs. Okafor, he began, the court. The doors exploded open. Not creaked. Not pushed. They slammed against the walls with a force that shook the entire room. The sound cracked through the courtroom like thunder. Every head turned. Victor twisted in his chair, irritation flashing across his face, until it vanished. Aim-Cha froze mid-motion, pen hovering above paper. Silence swallowed everything. Even the fans seemed to stop. Standing in the doorway was not who anyone expected. She wasn't dressed like a local attorney scrambling to make an appearance. No worn wig. No hurried apology. She stood tall, unshaken, commanding the space without saying a word. Her white suit was immaculate, sharp enough to cut through the tension in the room. Her silver hair was styled with precision, every strand deliberate. Power radiated off her, not loudly, but unmistakably. She removed her dark glasses slowly. Her eyes were cold, focused, dangerous. Behind her, 3 younger lawyers followed in perfect formation, each carrying sleek leather briefcases. They didn't look nervous. They looked prepared, like they already knew how this would end. She began walking. Each step echoed, measured, deliberate, like a countdown ticking towards something inevitable. Emeka's pen slipped from his fingers and hit the table. His face drained of color. No, he whispered, barely audible. That's not possible. Victor frowned, confused by the sudden shift. Who is that? He asked. Is that her mother? He shook his head almost immediately. No, that can't be right. She told me she was alone. The woman reached the defense table. She didn't greet Joy, didn't acknowledge the judge. Instead, she turned, slowly, and locked eyes with Victor. Then she smiled. Not kindly, not warmly. It was the kind of smile that made your instinct scream before your mind could catch up. My apologies for the delay, my lord, she said smoothly. Her voice carried effortlessly, filling the room without force. I was finalizing several filings at the Federal High Court in Abuja regarding Mr. Okafor's financial disclosures. She paused just long enough. It took longer than expected, she continued, to trace all of his undeclared accounts in Dubai and the Cayman Islands. Victor's stomach dropped. Justice Okoro leaned forward, his composure cracking for the first time. Counsel, he said, state your name for the record. The woman placed a gold-embossed card down with quiet precision. Helen Adekunle, she said clearly. Senior managing partner at Adekunle Williams & Partners, with offices in Abuja, Lagos, and London. A pause. Then, colder, more deliberate. I am entering my appearance as counsel for the defendant, Mrs. Joy Okafor. She turned her head slightly, her gaze returning to Victor. And, she added, I am also her mother. The silence that followed felt like impact. Victor blinked, his mind struggling to catch up. Mother, he stammered. Joy, you said she left. You said she was gone. Joy finally looked at him. Tears lined her eyes, but her posture had changed. She wasn't shrinking anymore. I said she was gone from my life, she replied quietly. Not that she was dead. We hadn't spoken until yesterday. Estranged, Helen repeated, taking her seat beside her daughter. The word landed like a verdict. She placed her briefcase on the table and opened it with two sharp clicks. Joy left my home 25 years ago, she said calmly. She wanted a simple life. She wanted to be loved for who she was, not for what her family name could offer. Her eyes shifted, locking onto Aim Cha. Recognition hit him instantly, and regret followed just as fast. Barrister No-Su, she said lightly, though there was nothing gentle in it. It's been a while. I believe the last time I saw you, you were still carrying files for senior counsel. Aim Cha straightened, his confidence cracking under pressure. Mrs. Adekunle, it's an honor. I wasn't aware you were practicing in River State. I practice wherever necessary, she replied without blinking. Rivers, Lagos, Abuja, international courts when required. She leaned forward slightly. I typically handle multi-billion naira disputes, she continued. But when my daughter called me yesterday, crying, explaining how a mid-level executive with an inflated ego decided to destroy her life, she paused. I made an exception. Objection. Victor shot up, panic bleeding through his voice now. This is a personal attack. Sit down, Mr. Okafor. Justice Okoro's voice cut through him instantly. But now, there was something new in the judge's tone. Respect, because he knew exactly who she was. Helen Adekunle wasn't just a lawyer. She was a legend, the kind of name people studied, not challenged. My lord, Justice Okoro said carefully, we are currently addressing a motion for immediate judgment. Yes, Helen interrupted smoothly, pulling a thick file from her case. I've reviewed it. She stepped forward, handing over a heavy stack of documents. Another copy landed on Emeka's table with a solid, deliberate thud. Creative, she said. Poorly researched, but creative. She turned slightly, addressing the room now. Barrister No-Su claims my client has no assets. That is now irrelevant. Her gaze sharpened. Mr. Okafor also claims ownership of multiple properties. The old GRA residence, the Lekki apartment, various investment portfolios, all protected under a prenuptial agreement signed 6 years ago. That prenup is binding. Victor snapped. She gets nothing. Helen turned to him slowly. Mr. Okafor, she said, her voice lowering. Are you familiar with the legal framework used to determine coercion in prenuptial agreements? Victor hesitated. That framework, she continued, was written by me. The words landed like a hammer. In 2003, I drafted the guidelines adopted by the Nigerian Law Reform Commission defining coercion in marital contracts. She tapped the documents in front of Aim Cha. And according to the sworn affidavit my daughter provided, supported by call logs and witness statements, you threatened violence against her family the night before the wedding. Her eyes locked onto Victor's. To force her to sign. The room didn't just feel tense anymore. It felt like everything Victor had built was starting to collapse. The reaction was instant. A ripple of shock moved through the courtroom. Real, audible gasps from the gallery. Even the clerks couldn't hide it. That's a lie. Victor exploded, shooting to his feet. His face flushed deep red, veins straining in his neck. She's lying. She's desperate. She'll say anything. Helen didn't even look at him. We have the text messages from that night, she said calmly, her voice slicing cleanly through his shouting. Recovered from your phone's backup server, the one you believed you had permanently erased. Exhibit C, my lord. Justice Okoro flipped to the marked section. His brows lifted slightly, then pulled together. His lips tightened into a thin, controlled line. Across the room, Aim Cha was no longer composed. He flipped through the pages rapidly, sweat forming along his forehead. His hands, steady just minutes ago, were now trembling. My lord, he stammered, we have not had sufficient time to review this material. This is highly irregular. This is an ambush. An ambush. Helen let out a quiet laugh, but there was nothing warm about it. It was cold, sharp, the kind of sound that made people shift uncomfortably in their seats. Barrister No-Su, she said, her tone almost conversational, you attempted to rush a judgment against an unrepresented woman while your client publicly humiliated her. She tilted her head slightly. You don't get to lecture me about fairness." The room fell silent again. "Now," she continued, turning slightly as if addressing a lecture hall rather than a courtroom, "let's discuss the real issue, money." She began to pace slowly, measured, controlled. "Mr. Okafor claims his net worth is approximately 35 million naira. Respectable for someone of his rather limited accomplishments." Victor looked like he might lunge across the room. But Helen continued, pulling out another folder, thicker, heavier. "My forensic accounting team, specialists who typically work alongside anti-corruption investigators, spent the last 18 hours tracing a rather interesting financial trail." The folder hit the table with a heavy thud. "Shell companies. Dubai. South Africa. Cayman Islands." She let the words hang. "It appears Mr. Okafor has been systematically diverting marital assets into an entity known as Summit Holdings over the past 4 years." She stepped closer. "The total amount concealed is not 35 million naira." She leaned in, her voice dropping just enough to force Victor to hear every word. "It is 98 million naira." The impact was immediate. "And," she added, straightening, "since none of these assets were disclosed in your sworn financial affidavit submitted 3 days ago," her gaze hardened, "that constitutes perjury and financial fraud." Victor collapsed back into his seat. The confidence was gone now, completely stripped away. He leaned toward Aimcha, his voice barely a whisper. "Do something, object, say something," but Aimcha didn't move. He stared at the documents, then at the judge, then back at Helen. Like a man realizing he had walked into a storm he couldn't escape. I request a recess, my lord," he said weakly. "Request denied." Justice Okoro didn't hesitate. His voice had changed, firmer, colder. "I want to hear more about these accounts." "Mrs. Adekunle, proceed." Helen adjusted her jacket smoothly, as if none of this required effort. "Thank you, my lord." She paused. "But before we go further into Mr. Okafor's financial misconduct," her eyes shifted, "I would like to address something else." She turned and walked back to Joy. For the first time, she placed a hand gently on her daughter's shoulder. Joy looked up at her, and something changed. The fear that had been sitting on her face all morning began to dissolve. In its place, relief, strength, even hope. "Victor," Helen said softly, almost casually, but somehow that made it worse. "You mocked my daughter because you believed she was weak." She turned, facing him fully now. "You saw kindness and mistook it for helplessness. You saw patience and called it stupidity." Her voice dropped lower. "You mistook mercy for fear." She glanced briefly at the court reporter. "Let the record reflect that Mrs. Joy Okafor is now formally represented by Helen Adekunle of Adekunle Williams and Partners." A pause. "I'm not here to negotiate." Her eyes locked onto Victor, sharp, unblinking. "I'm here to take everything." Silence. The houses. The accounts. Every hidden asset. Another step closer. Your reputation. Your standing. Your illusion of control. Her voice turned ice cold. "I will dismantle your life piece by piece until you are left with exactly what you try to leave my daughter with." A beat. Nothing. The word echoed. "Now," she said, turning slightly, "your client may take the stand. I have questions." The atmosphere shifted completely. The tension was no longer quiet. It crackled. The small audience leaned forward, fully engaged. Even those waiting for unrelated cases had stopped pretending not to watch. Something big was happening. Everyone could feel it. Justice Okoro rubbed his temples slowly, then looked toward the plaintiff's table. "Barrister Nosu, will your client testify?" Victor turned desperately. "Do I have a choice?" "You filed the suit," Aimcha snapped under his breath. Gone was the polished confidence. Now there was only urgency and fear. "You take the stand. And listen carefully, do not lie." "She already knows." Victor stood. Slowly. For the first time, he didn't look powerful. He looked exposed. He walked to the witness stand, each step heavier than the last. Officer Chukwu handed him the Bible. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" "I do," Victor muttered. He sat down, trying to gather what remained of his confidence. He reminded himself who he was. A senior manager, a businessman, educated, successful. This woman, this sudden interruption, was just trying to intimidate him. Helen approached the front calmly. No notes, no hesitation. She rested her hands lightly on the railing and studied him, like he was something she had already figured out. Mr. Okafor, she began, her tone almost polite. Let's start simple. Victor forced a smirk. Earlier, you suggested my daughter's delay was due to her disorganization. Is that correct? It was just a comment, he said quickly. She's always been like that. Late, unfocused. She doesn't understand responsibility. Disorganized, Helen repeated softly. Is that why you assumed control of all financial matters in the marriage? Victor straightened slightly. Yes. Joy doesn't understand money. She runs her small fabric business, spends time at church. She doesn't think about investments or strategy. I handled everything. For our future. For your future, Helen echoed. She nodded slowly. I see. Then, without warning, is that why you purchased an apartment in Lekki Phase 1 on March 20th this year? Victor froze. The one registered under Summit Holdings? His confidence flickered. That was an investment property. Of course, Helen said lightly. She pulled out a single sheet of paper. Because according to credit card statements linked to that property, statements your secretary failed to properly remove, you furnished it immediately. She glanced at the paper. King-size bed, dining set, premium kitchen appliances. She looked up. Quite luxurious for a rental. Joy gasped softly, her hand rising to her mouth. Victor's face drained of color. It was to increase value, he said quickly. Better furniture attracts better tenants. Of course it does, Helen agreed, her smile returning, but sharper now. And the gold necklace you purchased 3 days later, she continued, her voice tightening slightly, valued at 450,000 naira, she tilted her head. Was that also for the tenants? Victor didn't answer. Or was it, she continued, stepping closer, for the woman staying there? Objection. Aimcha jumped up, though his voice lacked conviction. Relevance. It becomes relevant when marital funds are used. Justice Okoro cut in, his gaze fixed on Victor. Objection overruled. Answer the question. Victor gripped the railing. His hand was slick with sweat. I don't know what she's talking about. Helen's smile widened, slow, deliberate. You don't. She nodded thoughtfully. Very well. She paused, then delivered it like a blade, sliding into place. Let's set your girlfriend aside for a moment. A beat. We'll come back to blessing. Victor flinched. Victor didn't just react, he flinched. A sharp, involuntary movement, like he'd been struck. And for the first time since the hearing began, it wasn't arrogance on his face. It was fear. Let's move on, Helen said calmly, as if nothing had happened. Summit Holdings. She took a slow step forward, her tone steady, precise. In your sworn affidavit, you stated your annual income last year was 8 million naira. Is that correct? Yes, Victor replied quickly, clinging to whatever confidence he had left. Business was slow. The economy was bad. Helen interrupted softly, almost amused. She turned toward the judge. My lord, I have here bank records from a financial institution in Dubai. They show a wire transfer of 12 million naira entering an account controlled by Summit Holdings. She raised the document slightly. On the exact same day, Mr. Okafor claims the economy was bad. The contradiction hung in the air like a trap snapping shut. She turned back to Victor. Would you like to explain what you did with that 12 million naira? Victor opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Silence. Allow me, Helen said gently. You converted the funds into cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, specifically. A pause. You stored it in a digital wallet, secured inside a safety deposit box at First Bank, Ramola branch. Another pause. Box number 237. Victor's composure shattered completely. His eyes widened, jaw dropping in disbelief. How did you? I am Helen Adekunal, she replied simply. And somehow that was enough. Finding hidden money is what I do, she continued. It's what I've done for over 2 decades. She stepped closer. Here is your problem, Mr. Okafor. You did not declare that 12 million naira. You did not disclose the cryptocurrency. and you certainly did not share any of it with your wife. Her voice dropped, quiet, controlled, deadly. This morning, you mocked my daughter. You laughed at her, called her poor, called her foolish. Another step. But the truth, she leaned in slightly, is that you are the fool. The words landed harder than anything before. You stole from your own marriage, hid the money, then paraded your mistress through Legos while my daughter survived on her last 5,000 naira. I didn't steal anything. Victor snapped, completely unraveling now. It's my money. I earned it. She sat at home sewing useless clothes. She didn't build anything. Why should she get half of what I worked for? The courtroom went dead silent. Not tense, not quiet, dead. Justice Okoro leaned forward slowly, his gaze sharp with disbelief. Mr. Okafor, he said, his voice measured, did you just admit, under oath, that you deliberately concealed marital assets to deny your wife her legal share? Victor froze. He looked at the judge, then at Aimcha. Aimcha had his head in his hands, shoulders shaking, not from fear, but from the realization that this was over. I didn't mean, Victor stammered. No further questions, Helen said smoothly, turning away before he could recover. Just like that, she was done with him. She returned to her seat beside Joy. Joy was crying, but not the same way as before. These tears were different, lighter, like something heavy had finally lifted. Helen reached over, squeezing her hand gently. It's finished, she whispered. He ended it himself. Across the room, Aimcha sat still for a moment. Then something shifted behind his eyes. Survival. 20 years in law had taught him one thing. Never drown with a sinking client. Victor staggered back to his seat, looking like a man who had just walked out of a fight he clearly lost. His suit was creased, his face damp, his confidence gone. Fix this, he whispered urgently. Say something. Object. Claim the evidence is illegal. Just do something. Aimcha didn't respond. He calmly began packing his briefcase. Victor blinked. What are you doing? No answer. Aimcha stood up, buttoning his jacket with deliberate calm. My lord, he said, voice steady. At this time, I respectfully move to withdraw as counsel for the plaintiff. Victor's head snapped toward him. What? You can't do that, he shouted. I paid you. Justice Okoro's voice cut in immediately. Counsel, we are mid-hearing. This is highly irregular. My lord, Aimcha said carefully, every word measured. A serious ethical conflict has arisen. Based on my client's testimony under oath, I cannot, in good conscience, continue representation. He paused. As an officer of this court, I cannot be associated with perjury. The meaning was crystal clear. Victor lied, and Aimcha wasn't going down with him. You traitor, Victor roared, lunging forward and grabbing Aimcha by the collar. You work for me. Officer. Justice Okoro didn't need to say more. Officer Chukwu moved instantly, pulling Victor back with force and slamming him into his chair. Sit down, he growled, or you'll finish this hearing in a cell. Victor obeyed, but barely. His chest heaved, his tie hanging loose, his control completely gone. For the first time, he looked alone, completely alone. Justice Okoro fixed Aimcha with a hard stare. Your request is denied for now. You will remain and ensure your client's rights are protected until this hearing concludes. Aimcha hesitated, then nodded stiffly. Yes, my lord. He sat down again, but noticeably, he moved his chair away from Victor. Distance. Clear, deliberate distance. Helen observed all of it in silence. Calm, detached, like she had expected every second. Then she stood again. My lord, she said smoothly, since counsel remains present, however reluctantly, I would like to call my next witness. Justice Okoro sighed, rubbing his temple. Proceed. Helen turned slightly. I call Miss Blessing Okonkwo. Victor's head jerked up. No, he whispered. She wouldn't. The doors opened again. A young woman stepped in. Simple navy dress. No makeup. No confidence. Just nerves. Her hands trembled as she walked. She didn't look at Victor. Not once. Blessing, Victor pleaded softly, reaching out. Please. She pulled away from him instantly, like he burned. The message was clear. Whatever they had was over. She took the stand, swore the oath. Her voice barely carried at first. Helen's tone softened, genuinely this time. "Thank you for being here," she said. "I know this isn't easy." Blessing nodded, swallowing hard. "Can you tell the court your relationship with Mr. Okafor?" A pause. "I was his girlfriend. For 2 years." "Was?" Helen repeated gently. Blessing inhaled slowly. "I ended it yesterday." "Why?" This time, Blessing didn't hesitate. She turned, looked straight at Victor. Tears filled her eyes, but so did anger. "Because she showed me everything," she said, her voice shaking. "The messages, the calls. A beat. You weren't just with me." The room leaned in. "You had another woman. In Abuja." The courtroom erupted. Whispers, gasps, shock rippling through every corner. "Order!" The gavel slammed repeatedly. But the damage was already done. Victor didn't just look exposed anymore. He looked finished. "Miss Okonkwo," Helen continued, completely unfazed by the tension still hanging in the air. "Did Mr. Okafor ever discuss his wife with you?" "All the time," Blessing replied immediately. The hesitation was gone now. Her words came fast, like something she had been holding back for too long. "He said she was useless, that she was a burden, that she didn't understand anything about business." Her voice sharpened. "He said he was going to destroy her in court, and he was proud of it." A murmur spread through the room. "He'd brag about it," she continued, her anger rising. "To his friends. He said he wanted to leave her with nothing. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to." Joy covered her face, her shoulders trembling. "He said it would be fun," Blessing added, her voice cracking. "That it would teach her a lesson, that she would come crawling back, begging." Helen's arm slipped around Joy's shoulders, steady, protective. "And he told me," Blessing said, tears now falling freely, "that he hired a lawyer who was a killer. That's what he called Barrister Nosu." A few people in the gallery exchanged looks. "He said she was too stupid and too poor to fight back," Blessing went on. "That he'd make sure she ended up in some tiny one-room place with nothing." She swallowed hard. He said, her voice broke. He wanted to own her, like a slave. The words settled over the courtroom like poison. No one spoke. No one moved. Helen let the silence stretch, allowing every word to sink in. "Thank you, Miss Okonkwo," she said gently. "I know that wasn't easy." She turned slightly. "No further questions." Then, calmly, "Counsel, would you like to cross-examine?" Imcha didn't even look up at first. When he finally did, his voice was quiet, defeated. "No questions, my lord." Justice Okoro removed his glasses slowly, wiping them with deliberate care. But his eyes never left Victor. "Mr. Okafor," he began, his voice low and dangerous. "In 23 years on this bench, I have seen bitter divorces. I have seen cruelty, pettiness, desperation." He leaned forward. "But what I have witnessed today," his tone hardened, "is among the most disturbing displays of arrogance and deception I have ever encountered." Victor stared at the table, unable to meet his gaze. "You mocked this court," the judge continued, his voice rising like thunder. "You mocked your wife, a woman you swore to protect." Each word landed heavier than the last. "You lied under oath. You concealed assets. You used marital funds to finance multiple affairs. And all the while, you sat there laughing." A pause, believing you had already won. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then the judge turned to Joy. His expression softened just slightly. "Mrs. Okafor, I owe you an apology. This court should have seen the truth sooner." Joy nodded through her tears. Helen squeezed her shoulder. "But," the judge continued, straightening, "I am now in a position to correct that failure." He picked up his pen. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. "I'm issuing immediate temporary orders. Final judgment will follow pending a full forensic audit of all assets, domestic and international." His voice became precise, authoritative. "First, all bank accounts, investments, and assets linked to Mr. Victor Okafor, or any entity under his control, are hereby frozen." Victor groaned under his breath. Control of those assets is granted solely to Mrs. Joy Okafor and her legal counsel. A ripple moved through the room. Second, Mrs. Okafor is granted immediate and exclusive possession of the marital home. He fixed Victor with a hard stare. You have until 6 p.m. today to vacate. You may take only personal clothing and toiletries. Remove anything else, a pause, and you'll be charged with theft. Victor's shoulders sagged. Third, a full transcript of today's proceedings will be forwarded to the appropriate authorities for investigation into perjury, fraud, and financial misconduct. His gaze shifted briefly to Aim Cha. Counsel, I advise full cooperation. Yes, my lord. Aim Cha replied quickly, his voice smaller than before. And finally, the judge said, turning toward Helen, regarding legal costs. Helen smiled slightly. Mr. Okafor will bear full responsibility for all legal fees incurred by Mrs. Okafor. The judge paused almost dryly. I assume those fees will be significant. Very, my lord, Helen replied. The gavel came down. Court is adjourned. The sound echoed like a final verdict on Victor's life. Everything shifted at once. Voices, movement, whispers, but Victor remained still. Frozen. In less than 3 hours, everything had collapsed. His money, his reputation, his control, gone. He stood slowly, his legs unsteady, and looked across the room. Joy was different now. She stood straighter, stronger, like the weight crushing her had finally been lifted. Victor walked toward her, desperation in every step. Joy, please, he croaked. You can't do this. Where am I supposed to go? What am I supposed to do? Joy looked at him. No anger, no sadness, just nothing, like he no longer mattered. Before she could speak, Helen stepped forward, placing herself between them. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Mr. Okafor, she said coldly, my daughter does not speak to criminals. She gestured slightly behind her. If you have anything further, direct it to my associate. A young lawyer stepped forward, handing Victor a card. Helen turned back to Joy, her tone shifting instantly. Let's go, she said. We have a lunch reservation, and I believe you have a life to reclaim. They walked past him. Joy didn't look back. Not once. Victor stood there as the doors closed behind them. Then Aim Cha brushed past him, already on his phone, already moving on. Just like that, Victor Okafor was alone. Completely alone. But the story wasn't over. Not yet. Outside, the heat of Port Harcourt hit like a wall as Helen and Joy stepped into the sunlight. A black Mercedes pulled up to the curb, but it wasn't theirs. The window rolled down. An older man sat inside. Gray hair, sharp features, the presence of someone used to control. Joy stopped walking. Her breath caught. Daddy, she whispered. Helen stiffened instantly. Hello, Helen, the man said calmly. I hear you made quite an entrance. I did what was necessary, she replied sharply. I protected my daughter. I know, he said, his gaze shifting to Joy. And it's been a long time. Joy looked at him, hurt, confused, guarded. What are you doing here? He stepped out of the car, adjusting his jacket. No warmth, no apology, just business. I'm here, he said, pulling out a document, because Victor Okafor owes me a significant amount of money. He stepped closer, and I understand you've just taken control of everything he owns. Helen moved instantly, placing herself in front of Joy. Whatever Victor owes you, she said firmly, is his problem. Her eyes hardened. Not hers. Not according to this. Samuel unfolded the document with calm precision, like a man delivering a final move. Victor borrowed 15 million naira from my firm, Fortress Investment Group, 7 months ago. He used the old GRA house as collateral. A pause. The loan defaulted yesterday. He looked directly at Joy. That means the house now belongs to my company. The words hit harder than anything inside the courtroom. Joy felt it instantly, that sinking, hollow drop in her chest. She had just won, just fought her way back to something stable, and now, in a single sentence, it was slipping away again. Helen didn't hesitate. She snatched the document from Samuel's hand, her eyes scanning it rapidly. You loaned him money against our daughter's home? She asked, disbelief sharp in her voice. You knew how he was treating her. You knew something was wrong, and you still went ahead with this? Business is business, Samuel replied with a shrug. Victor came with a proposal. I provided capital. He failed to repay. That's how it works. Then, softer, almost awkwardly, he looked at Joy. I'm sorry, but the house is collateral. You'll need to make other arrangements. Joy's vision blurred. Not again. Not after everything. But then, Helen stopped reading. She looked up and smiled. Slow, dangerous, familiar. Oh, Samuel, she said quietly. You really should have done your due diligence. Samuel frowned. What are you talking about? His name is on the deed. Yes, Helen replied calmly. His name is there. She reached in her briefcase and pulled out a blue folder. But did your lawyers examine the ownership structure? Samuel's expression shifted, just slightly. In 2019, Helen continued. Opening the folder, the property was transferred into a family asset trust. She glanced briefly at Joy. It was during her pregnancy. I advised it for tax and asset protection purposes. She turned back to Samuel. Victor agreed. Of course, he didn't read the fine print. Helen flipped to a specific page. Section 8, Paragraph 3. She tapped it lightly. Any use of trust property as collateral requires the written consent of all beneficiaries. A pause. That includes Joy. Silence. Helen pulled out another sheet. Joy never signed this agreement, did she? Samuel's eyes dropped to the signature page. There it was. Joy Okafor. But now, side by side with Joy's actual signature, it didn't match. Not even close. The ink looked wrong. The strokes uneven. Forced. He forged it. Joy whispered, her voice low but steady. Another betrayal. Another layer exposed. Samuel's face drained of color. If that signature is forged, Helen said smoothly, then your entire loan agreement is void. She closed the folder with a soft snap. The collateral was never legally pledged. Samuel stared at the papers like they had turned against him. That means, he said slowly, I've lost 15 million naira. Correct, Helen replied, almost pleasantly. And if you attempt to enforce this fraudulent agreement against my daughter, her tone shifted, quiet, lethal. I will take your company to court. I will bury it in litigation. Years of it. She stepped closer. And I will make sure every newspaper in this country knows exactly what you tried to do. A beat. Make your own daughter homeless. The words landed harder than any threat. Then her voice softened, just slightly. Or, she said, you could do the right thing for once. Silence stretched between them. Walk away from the loan. Take your loss. Go after Victor if you want. I won't stop you. Her eyes locked onto his. But you leave the house with Joy. A pause. And you apologize. Samuel looked at Joy. Really looked this time. Not as a business liability. Not as a mistake from the past. But as his daughter. And what he saw wasn't the same girl who had walked away years ago. She was stronger now. Hardened. Resilient. And none of it came from him. What do you want me to do? He asked quietly. Walk away, Helen said. And say what you should have said 25 years ago. Samuel exhaled slowly. A long, heavy breath. Then he turned to Joy. I didn't know about the forgery, he said. I shouldn't have trusted Victor without speaking to you. I should have been, he hesitated, a better father. The words felt unfamiliar in his mouth. I'm sorry. Joy looked at him. Once, she would have broken down, begged for this moment. Now it just felt distant. It's okay, Daddy, she said softly. You can go. A pause. I have somewhere to be. Samuel nodded once. No argument. No defense. He got back into the car. The door shut. And just like that, he was gone. Helen watched the car disappear, then turned back to Joy. This time, her smile was different. Real. Warm. Well, she said lightly, that's handled. She tilted her head. And I believe we have a reservation and about 25 years of conversation to catch up on. Joy stared at her for a moment. This woman she had run from. Feared. Misunderstood. The same woman who just stood between her and everything that tried to break her. Joy stepped forward and hugged her. At first, Helen stiffened. Instinct. Habit. Then slowly, she relaxed. Her arms wrapped around her daughter. Tight. Protective. I missed you, Mama, Joy whispered. I know, Helen replied softly. I missed you too. A pause. And this time, I'm not going anywhere. They stood there in the sunlight, years of distance finally breaking apart. Behind them, through the courthouse windows, Victor's world continued collapsing, quietly, completely. But for Joy, something new had just begun. 3 months later, the Terraculture Gallery in Lagos was overflowing. Soft music played, glasses clinked, conversations hummed through the space. The walls were lined with bold, striking paintings, stories told in color and form. Women rising, breaking free, reclaiming themselves. The exhibition was titled Rebirth, and nearly every piece was already sold. At the center of it all stood Joy. Dressed in a stunning blue and gold outfit she designed herself, she moved through the crowd with quiet confidence, smiling, speaking, owning her space. She wasn't the same woman from that courtroom, not even close. The centerpiece of the gallery drew the most attention. A large painting titled The Gavel. It showed a courtroom, but not as it was, as it felt. A woman in white stood like a force of nature, light breaking from her hands, shattering chains wrapped around another figure. It was raw, powerful, personal, a story turned into something permanent, something unforgettable. Point one collector, a wealthy Lagos businessman draped in an immaculate agbada, stepped forward, eyes locked on the centerpiece. I don't care about the price, he said firmly. I'm buying it. My wife needs to see this every single day. Joy smiled, her voice soft but filled with emotion. Thank you. That means more than you know. Across the gallery, Helen Adekunle stood quietly, a glass of white wine in hand. She looked effortlessly elegant in a cream suit, observing her daughter, not as a lawyer assessing a case, but as a mother witnessing something she had almost lost forever. Her phone buzzed. She glanced down. A breaking news alert. Former oil executive Victor Okafor sentenced to 7 years for fraud and money laundering. Helen opened the article. There he was. Victor, but not the man from the courtroom. Not the arrogant figure in tailored suits and polished shoes. This version looked finished. His hair had gone gray, his face hollow, his eyes empty. The image showed him being escorted into Kirikiri prison, wrist-bound in handcuffs. The report detailed everything. The hidden 98 million naira, the offshore accounts, the forged signatures, the cryptocurrency seized, the affairs exposed. Even his own lawyer had cooperated to save himself. Victor hadn't just lost the case. He had lost his entire life. Helen closed the article without a word and slipped her phone back into her purse. She had already watched it happen in real time 3 weeks ago, from the front row, as the sentence was delivered. Justice in its purest form. She walked toward Joy. Every painting is sold, she said calmly. The gallery owner says they've never seen an opening night like this. Joy let out a soft laugh, almost in disbelief. I still can't believe it. People actually want my work. They're paying for it. I never imagined this. You were always capable of this, Helen replied. You just needed the space to become it. Before Joy could respond, the gallery doors opened again. Daniel hurried in, weaving through the crowd, holding a tablet tightly. His expression was urgent, but not worried. Excited. Mrs. Adekunle. Joy, he called. Sorry to interrupt, but you need to see this. He handed the tablet over. The final settlement cleared, he said. All assets recovered. Property sales, hidden funds, damages awarded by the court, everything. Joy looked down at the screen and froze. The number staring back at her didn't feel real. It wasn't just money. It was security, freedom, possibility, a future she had never dared to imagine. Her breath caught. This is real, she whispered. Helen placed a steady hand on her shoulder. Yes, she said gently. It's real. Joy's eyes filled with tears, but this time they weren't from pain. He can't hurt me anymore, she said quietly. Helen shook her head slightly. No, she corrected. It's not about him anymore. She turned Joy to face the room. The art, the people, the life unfolding around her. This isn't an ending, Helen said. This is your beginning, the life you were meant to live. Outside, Lagos shimmered under the night sky. Traffic moved. Voices carried. Life continued like nothing had happened. But somewhere else, in a cold prison cell, Victor lay staring at a blank ceiling, finally understanding the weight of his choices. He had mistaken kindness for weakness, silence for surrender, and mercy for lack of power. He never saw the storm coming, because the most dangerous storms don't start with thunder. They start with stillness, with silence, with a calm that hides everything. And by the time they arrive, it's already too late. Back inside the gallery, Joy laughed, freely, fully, without fear. Gone was the trembling woman in a gray dress, sitting alone at a courtroom table. In her place stood someone new, Joy Adekunle Okafor, artist, creator, survivor. A woman who didn't just reclaim her life. She rebuilt it, piece by piece. Victor thought he could take everything from her. But he forgot one thing. He wasn't just fighting a woman. He was provoking a legacy, a force, a mother who never forgets and never forgives when her child is broken. Joy didn't just win a case. She found her voice again, her purpose, her power. And Victor, he walked away with nothing except time. Time to sit with every decision he made. Time to remember the moment he laughed, right before everything collapsed. If this story hit you even a little, go ahead and hit that like button. It really does help more people find stories like this. And share this with someone who needs a reminder. Being underestimated isn't the end. Sometimes it's just a setup. Subscribe to Folktale by Eli so you never miss a story like this. Stories that make you think twice about how you treat people. Before you go, tell me in the comments, have you ever been underestimated and then proved everyone wrong? Where are you watching from? And be honest, what did you feel when her mother walked into that courtroom? Remember this, be careful who you mock. Be careful who you try to break, because you never know who's standing behind them. And sometimes, the person you thought was powerless is just one moment away from changing everything.